Good evening, my name is Khaya Masinta. Thank you all for joining us. It is my very great pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight, Dorianne Weil, also known as Dr. D. She will be talking to us on the topic, Own Your Story, Define the Ending. I'll begin with a quote by President Nelson Mandela, addressed to Dorianne. I don't know if you are aware of the hope and inspiration you offer and the difference you make to so many lives. Dori, thank you for the great contribution you make to building our nation. Dorianne Weil is a clinical and organizational psychologist with over 30 years of experience in hospital, private, and corporate practice. She is an internationally recognized and respected inspirational speaker, as well as an expert in personal development and human relations. She has addressed over 100,000 people and facilitated workshops in 57 countries. Dorianne also serves as a mediator, facilitator, and executive coach. Entertaining, dynamic, and knowledgeable, Dr. D is a household name in South Africa. She regularly appears on TV and radio and is quoted in the press and print media. In fact, she was the media psychologist for the famous Oscar Pistorius trial. Currently, she hosts her own weekly podcast called Thrive with Dr. D and her own live show called Coffee and Connect with Dr. D. During this time of the coronavirus pandemic, she is a sought-after international panellist and global speaker on mental health and on post-traumatic growth. Dorianne has received recognition for her outstanding contribution to the betterment of the lives of people and South African society. She was awarded South Africa's most influential woman lifetime achiever in business and government in CEO magazine. She is also the winner of the APSA Jewish Achiever Cyril Harris Humanitarian Award, the International Rotary Paul Harris Award, and was also a finalist in the Business Women's Association Award. Without further ado, let me call on Dorianne.
Hi, thank you so much, and Rabbi Masinta, for inviting me to be on this really illustrious panel. I think that the work that you do in our community and the recognition that you have and the esteem that you hold really serve as an inspiration and role model for all of us. Honestly, just looking at the work that you do and the people that you invite to address us really inspires us to keep on, to believe in the miracles that we heard in that song, and absolutely to never give up. So how do we keep on going in these crazy, uncertain times that we are really living in? You know, Chaya, we used to always talk, it was quite common to talk about global warming. Sometimes we still do. But at the moment, unfortunately, there's more talk about global mourning. When do we have mourning, and why do we talk about it globally? Mourning comes with loss, and mourning comes with grief. And of course, there's been a lot of that, not only in terms of illness and loss of life, but there's been loss of jobs, loss of money, loss of routine, particularly loss of certainty, loss of physical contact, which is so important, loss of the things that we used to just take for granted, that kind of feeling of warm space around us, you know, when we sit at the dinner table together with our families. And I think that the greatest issue that is spurring the enormity of the fact that there's also a mental health pandemic, not only a health pandemic, but a mental health pandemic, is to do with this huge springboard of uncertainty that really is, you know, we thought in the beginning that it was kind of, how are we going to survive 3 weeks of lockdown? Well, it's a kind of 3-week sprint, but that's now turned into a marathon. And we are quite uncertain about the future. And someone said to me the other day, look, we don't even know when the future really is. And I remember absolutely kind of focusing in on the enormity of what uncertainty does. I mean, we're so much better at surviving and then ultimately thriving when we know what something is, when we know that there's a time frame, when we know that there is an end in sight, some light at the end of the tunnel. And right at the beginning of this pandemic, Chaya, no, I was speaking to some of the doctors who were about to be called to serve on the front lines. It was in the beginning, and some of them had already started. And I remember a conversation where one of them said to me, you know, Dori, I was at 9/11. And I said, that must have been really, really traumatic. And he said it was a traumatic experience. It was huge loss of life. It was devastating. What America, what the country, what the world, and most especially the families of these people absolutely had to go through. But there was a difference. And the difference was we knew what we were dealing with quite quickly. We knew that we couldn't get sick. We knew numbers. We knew that there was an end in sight. And with this time, he said, you know, we can get sick in dealing with this. We don't really understand. I think they understand much more what we're dealing with, what this was. We don't know how long it's going to last. And then he went on to other things that I've seen manifest and we focused upon. He said, you know, we might be isolated from our families, which means that we don't come back at the end of the day and get filled up by, you know, a hug from our loved ones or our children running up to us. You know, it's going to be different. And then he said, you know, even now when we go through the doors of the hospital and we connect, our eyes connect with some of our colleagues and with the other doctors, there's a kind of knowing, a connection. Some of it is based on this uncertainty and fear. One of the positives is that we're using each other more than we ever did before as a support system. So this kind of uncertainty is generating a lot of the emotions that go with the territory, but have been exaggerated by this kind of springboard that is going on. So we have gone through, and I'm talking about owning the story. This is the reality of what we are and what we have gone through. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we see it and how we can deal with it, and whether there is possibility, or when we recognize it and go through it, of defining the ending, hopefully recognizing that it doesn't always have to end in long-term post-traumatic stress, as people have predicted, by recognizing the feelings that are being generated almost as normal feelings to a very traumatic, different, and uncertain situation, that we recognize them, we own that story, we develop strategies for overcoming them in the hope of being able to participate with our belief, with a higher power, with support from other people in coming through it and defining the ending differently. So what I'm saying is that fear and sadness and stress and anxiety are almost predictable outcomes to a greater or lesser extent. And people say, well, you know, one of the positive things is that the stigma of mental health has definitely diminished, because everybody's going through this to some extent or another, and it's giving people more chance to talk about it with more vulnerability, more openness, because they look at everyone else and they say, you know, we all part of this, we all in the same boat together. And I like to say, most particularly in South Africa, that we all in the same storm. We definitely all have to deal with it. We've all gone through the stages, those common grief stages, maybe not in order, but have experienced them to some extent. But we're not really in the same boat. We're in different boats. We're in the same storm, but we are in different boats. There's some people who are more like on ocean liners, if you like. There's some people who are on broken rafts. Our circumstances are very different, but it is affecting us all. And talking about circumstances, what happens is that differences become magnified in a crisis like this. They become incubated. So divisiveness and differences in social, in society that we all knew about, of course, in South Africa, become highlighted and magnified. even differences in relationship or similarities in relationship. You're fortunate enough to be in a connected relationship with good communication. The value and the gratitude that you may be experiencing of the time that you have together, the difference of those important conversations, the resolution of things that might have been tucked away that now manifest and give yourself a chance to talk about with respect and with love of the other person. This has provided the opportunity for even greater connection and relationships that perhaps may have always been there, but we could have taken for granted before. On the other hand, if we're talking about relationships, there is a little saying that says for better, for worse, but not for lunch. Here you are, maybe under lockdown or at home with your partner who is now working from home 24/7. You've suddenly put up your hand, maybe not voluntarily, not only to be a mom, but also to be a teacher as well, taking on those roles. You expect him to kind of be more involved, where you say there are two people in this relationship, not only one. Please step up and help. The roles aren't so clearly defined. It's not the escape, it's the natural time that you had maybe at your work or with your friends or whatever it is taken away from you. The level of frustration can increase. And we've seen statistically in some cases that there has been an increase in the divorce rate and also an increase in gender-based violence, particularly when a level of frustration is really built up with not the same kind of outlets, and these feelings spill out because it's very difficult sometimes to own vulnerability, most especially for men, to say, I'm frustrated, I'm scared, I don't know what the future holds, I don't feel adequate, I'm not earning enough money anymore. And to own those kind of feelings is difficult, so they get acted out, sometimes in quite destructive ways. So the stages of grief, you all know the common ones that have been highlighted by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, a famous Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She spoke about 5 grief stages. And in fact, I'm also here to tell you with some joy and through a lot of research that a 6th stage has also been added fairly recently by a colleague of hers called David Kessler, who used to work for her and who needed to add on another stage because he felt that the story just didn't end after stage number 5. So the common stages that we all know is usually in the beginning when there's some sort of loss, whether it's a personal loss or whether it's the loss of some of the certainty or routine or financial security that I've been talking about, is often denial. Do you remember in the beginning there's, oh, please, it's only flu. People are exaggerating. The media are crazy. It's really not happening. We're making too much of it. It's going to be over very quickly. And denial is actually fairly important, because if one recognizes the reality and the onslaught of the reality right at the beginning, it's quite hard to deal with. This kind of eases you in to having to deal with the reality and the feelings that come with it. So, in the beginning, it can't be happening to me. And then, of course, often you see, and it doesn't happen in order. These stages can happen in a random manner. They're just feelings that we've experienced at some time. Some anger, and the anger often maybe be directed to authority or to government, or to you feel the anger often when you feel out of control. We as human beings are used to being in control. And when we can't change our circumstances, or certainly on a platform like this, if we don't really recognize that not everything is under our control. A lot of the executives that I work with are used to saying to themselves, listen, if you don't like the circumstances, just change them. You are in the driver's seat of your life. 5% of what happens to people is luck, fate, or circumstance. You take care of the 95%, the 5% will take care of itself. So this has been very, very humbling, and I will talk about that as one of the meanings of defining the ending, the humbling experience of how much of life is really under your own control. How can you choose your reaction to certain circumstances that you have to accept when you can't control them? And then often what we see, and you all know about this, is we have these very silent but very powerful conversations with a bigger power, sometimes with the Lord. And we say, please, I haven't been the best human being I could be. I can be a better husband. I can be a better wife. Please make this go away. We kind of enter it as a kind of negotiation, a bargaining. I'll do better for you. Please do better for me. I will behave in X number of ways going forward. I make a pledge and I can see where I've wronged, and I will make every attempt to be a better person. Help me out here. Let this person get better. Please let me cope better. Let these feelings go away, that bargaining stage. And then together with that, or maybe sometimes after it, when the reality of what we're dealing with, which I think long hit us a little while ago, that this is a marathon and we're in it for a while. We don't know how long. We do believe, I do believe, and I think most people do definitely, that this too shall pass. But the reality is we have to cope with what we're dealing with, and that it is there, and we're not going to magically just wish it away for now. And together with that realization that there is a reality, and we have to confront that reality, that's when you start feeling the sadness. People who were prone to depression or anxiety before have an increase in that. People who you felt that they were in control and they cope better are experiencing feelings of sadness and being upset in relation to loss. So I'm saying, as I say, that a lot of it are natural reactions to a situation, but it doesn't make those feelings go away. We still have to have some way, some kind of support, some way of looking with it that can help us together and collectively deal with it. Some people say, you say that they're normal reactions and it's not necessarily a psychiatric or mental health condition. We're supposed to feel these things. We're supposed to know that we are alive members of the human race. Grief is often the price you pay for love. Can you imagine if you didn't feel grief with the loss of people that are very close to you? What would that say about the honoring of that person and the depth of love and how much they meant in a close relationship? So yes, some of these feelings are normal feelings, but when do we need to go for professional help? And I just want to say that I've really got two criteria for that. The one is if its duration and extent, how bad and how long. So it's not just a bad day for a day or two. You're unable to kind of to exercise the thoughts in your head. You're ruminating all the time. These feelings and these thoughts affect your functioning, your personal functioning, and any attempt that you might have to work. So both your work life and your personal life are unable to be dealt with in the way you usually do for more than 2 days or a day or two. You don't have to sit with that if you feel that you're not getting out of it. And one of the things that has happened is that we've seen the collective compassion that sits inside so many people. You just need to see it on this platform and what people, have done for the community and for other people. Sometimes it's money if they can. Sometimes it's service over sales. It's not necessary. It's offering your services and your expertise and your support at something that you used to charge for before. It's recognizing the need of people. And that recognition is also joining people and making people feel more connected, because there is the recognition of being able to make a difference, and talking about being able to make a difference. The power of support, the healing power of support, is actually very well known and helping. Sometimes when people say to me, I'm really having a bad day, it might not be the only thing I say, but I might say to them, have you done something for someone else? Because we know that offering something or helping someone doesn't really only help the person. It has an enormous effect. All the research on positive psychology and on happiness shows that giving is the second, relationships are the first, but giving is the second most important factor of your own happiness. And people who give and who get themselves into that state have quite a lot of physiological benefits as well. They tend to get sick less often, they tend to get better more quickly, they tend to live longer. And it's not a mistake. You can see that what happens is because when you feel of value, it boosts you. I can offer something that is of meaning to another human being or to a community, like we see with our role models here and around us all the time. When you know that you can be the difference that makes the difference. So it is really very, very powerful. But how do we deal with these feelings that are manifesting often in our daily lives all the time, of fear, of anxiety, of sadness? This is where I say, if you don't own the story, you can't define the ending. And why am I saying this? Because the start of dealing with it is really counterintuitive. Why is it counterintuitive? What do we usually say to ourselves? Well, we want to douse it down. It's nothing. It's not so important. I'll be better in the morning. I'm having a bad day. Or I'm not so important. Rather, let me look at everybody else around you. It's better to just take those feelings, put them under a carpet, such that our emotional carpets start looking like the Alps after a while. And all of the research and the common knowledge is actually that you have to lean in, become a bit of a buzzword, that lean in to the emotion, recognize what you're feeling, what caused it and why, in order to be able to kind of control it. So what we say is that if you name it, you can begin to tame it. If you feel it at first, that's the beginning of healing it. If you face that you're going through these things, you can begin, if you embrace it, you can begin to face it. Now, how does that really work? By leaning in. Some people might say, why should you recognize these feelings and lean into them? Are they not going to overtake you then? What happens on a physiological level, just very briefly, is really interesting. The feelings can kind of overtake you and be overwhelming, because what happens is that they emanate from the primitive part of the brain. They emanate from the amygdala, which is the emotional part of the brain, which was originally designed and still designed, but had more use in primitive man for fight or flight. So it was either eat or be eaten, have lunch or be lunch, if you like. And so these feelings are really responses. They're emotional responses to thoughts that are often catastrophizing. What if this or what if that? They're often the future. What if I don't know when I'm ever going to see my children again? What if I have an elderly parent and that parent really doesn't survive this? What if I get sick? And you start catastrophizing and ruminating in such a way that comes out of that part of the brain where you can't think rationally and you can't really respond. It's the difference between reaction and response. The first one is reaction. And when you're able to see a gap Between the stimulus and response, it was Viktor Frankl that said, between every stimulus and response, there's a gap. And in the gap, there's a choice you can think. So when these feelings, and you recognize them, start overwhelming you, and you go into them, you create that gap. And you know, our grandparents weren't so stupid when there were those little tips that they used to give us, like, see a big red stop sign, just stop, breathe, breathe, take stock, get yourself into the present. You're becoming overwhelmed by thoughts that might not really have a basis in reality. In the gap, create a space, and then you can enter into more of the rational, adult, thinking part of the brain that says to you, hang on, let me look at the facts. I am healthy now. This isn't happening. I am what you, more of the facts of the matter instead of the fears of the matter, the facts rather than the fears. And you can begin to have those kind of conversations with yourself that says, I've been in really tough situations before in my life. Remember when? I have resources that live inside me. I have coping skills. I've been resilient in my life with so many challenges before. These things also are there, have been overtaken for the moment by some of the reality of these fears, but they're also there. And someone said to me something that I found to be very useful, is they said, you know, if you say to yourself, if you were your best friend, what would your best friend be saying to you? How would you be calming yourself down if you were a best friend? So it's about getting into the present, stopping that. You know, we have a negative bias. There's a built-in negative bias, which was kind of for self-protection. We kind of, you know, negative thoughts are more like Velcro, if you like. Positive thoughts are more like Teflon. They're kind of harder to hold on to. We have to work harder to see that they also have a certain amount of weight. We often have binocular vision, which magnifies the negative unrealistically and minimizes the positive, and we don't really see it or get back into the present. And what happens to us is, if we don't own the story and we don't see what's happening to us, and we don't find ways, and I'm going to be talking about other ways of being able to control those feelings, then we become overwhelmed by them, and they will be heard. The more you try and push them down, and the more you say that this isn't happening, you develop physical symptoms, which are often as a result of huge unresolved stress, sometimes can last into the future. We all know a tremendous amount about our own history and the post-traumatic stress that followed the Holocaust. And a lot of it was also to do with the inability to unpack and to deal with the feelings, not the inability. It was common wisdom to say it's over, the past is the past, we just need to look forward. And we didn't recognize that the past sometimes affects the present. It still lives inside us because it wasn't spoken about or dealt with or understood properly by people who are not going to be echo chambers for you, or who are going to say, well, let me tell you about my experience. You think that is bad? Oh, wait till you hear what happened to me. Or wait till I tell you about what happened to my son or my daughter. You know, trying to sort of not really listen to understand, but listen to respond. And what we're needing now is listening to people, connecting with them in a very empathic way, understanding not only the words that our people are saying, but being empathic and recognize the feelings that they're going through. And it's really interesting because, you know, when people feel shame, I'm not good enough, I shouldn't be feeling like this, I'm not clever enough, I'm not strong enough, I'm not capable enough, I'm not rich enough, I'm not whatever it is, when those shameful feelings of not being enough come into it, and someone can respond to you with understanding and with empathy about recognize that's really tough. You're going through a hard time. You're feeling scared at the moment. You're not sure how you're going to get out of it. When you do that, people will start talking to you more about the positive. But the biggest thing about it is that we experience the healing power of support. You know, there's a wonderful African greeting that you all know. It starts off with saying Sawubona. Sawubona means I see you. Isn't that beautiful? To greet someone by saying I see you, meaning I understand you, and shame and empathy cannot coexist. They cannot be together. Empathy is like kryptonite for shame, because what you're doing by seeing someone and by understanding their feelings and by being together with them, becoming part of the tribe, which we are so blessed in South Africa, with our community to have such a supportive tribe. But even a smaller tribe, a tribe of your family, or a couple of people who you know have your back and who you can count on at any time for support, no matter what, without them telling you what to do, offering a huge amount of advice, or as I say, saying that their situation is much worse. Being there with you in the present moment, with all of your senses fully receptive for the other person, that to me is real intimacy. Real intimacy is that kind of connection, and that support is incredibly healing. It makes people feel validated. It makes them feel understood, not crazy, worthy, that they're not in this alone. And that kind of support and the community support that we experience in South Africa is absolutely invaluable. I was talking to somebody very senior today from the Gev. They were talking about how their resources, all of their resources, have been so stretched, but the value of the partnership between the NGOs, Jewish NGOs, the religious organizations, and the community is something that we can be so, so proud of. And we don't even know the healing power of that for this community, for what we're doing now, for being able to connect in this way. And then if we go back to the stages, you know, after the stages, I said there were 5. The 5th one is acceptance of, okay, this is a reality. We're going to have to deal with it. It will go away, but we don't really know when. And that's what people are talking about a lot now. Like, you know, this word pivot. We're pivoting. I always have this image of kind of demented ballerinas turning round and round and round and round on the stage, you know, making new patterns, and we pivoting. But what it really is a positive word. What it means is that we are adapting, and more than adapting, we're creating, we're innovating new ways of doing things, just like we are doing now, new ways of creating things. And that's making people think that, you know, that saying that we always used to have, oh, for goodness sake, just face reality. That's not going to happen. We are creating new realities and new ways of doing things that actually we thought we never even imagined we could. But the situation is saying to us, look, either you're going to just have to accept some consequences, and sometimes dire consequences, of the situation, or, you know, together with support, innovation, creativity, new ways of looking at things, new ideas, reaching out, stretching your internal yardstick a little bit, you have to take more of a risk because you're stepping into uncharted and risky waters where you can't see the new banks. But, you know, the situation calls for that, and let's see what happens. And some people are experiencing very positive results, better than they ever thought, of seeing opportunities and new ways of doing things born out of the situation, and that level of acceptance, which is the 5th stage. Then I told you that there is a 6th stage, which I will refer to now, but I'll tell you what it is. It's quite recent. It actually only really started being written about in 2017. David Kessler lost his own son at 21. He'd been working with loss and grief for a long time through these stages and the importance of these stages with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And when it came to the acceptance and dealing with it, he just said to himself, this can't be all there is. There's got to be another stage. There has to be some sort of message or some sort of meaning in this, or something that is going to reveal itself. Are there lessons through all of this? If there are, how can we harness these lessons to influence our present and to influence our future a little bit positively? And it's very interesting that, because if you look at what happened at the very beginning of the pandemic, I was actually getting quite frustrated with all the WhatsApps and the emails that were coming through that always ended in exactly the same way. And they always said, be positive, be positive, be positive, just be positive. And to me, that also meant don't recognize your feelings. Don't own the story. Don't think like that. That's no good. You're going to make yourself sick. The point is that you make yourself sick unless you own the story and own the story first. Otherwise, you can't define the ending. So your levels of frustration, I spoke about physiologically what might happen, lower back ache, migraine headaches, appetite problems, sleep disturbances on a psychological level, decreased level of tolerance, increased level of frustration, spilling out in the slightest way, in anger unnecessarily for something that doesn't warrant that kind of reaction. Why? Because there's been a huge buildup and you've said, just get it out of the way, just get it out of the way. None of the stuff is ever dealt with properly, which you have to do to define the ending. You have to own the story. If you don't, the story will own you. And it comes through in ways that you don't want, unexpectedly, and it'll hijack you, in other words. And we want to prevent that. So I've spoken about the healing power of support. By the way, that's all very researched. It's scientific. It's not just feel-good stuff. The dean of the School of Medicine at the University of California in Irvine, some years ago, his name was Professor Dean Ornish. He wrote a book called Love and Survival, the scientific basis of the healing power of intimacy. And he showed on a scientific level what support and love does to people in terms of their health, in terms of their physiology, not only in terms of their psychological state. So we've spoken a little bit about that and what we're going to talk about now, what some of the meaning is. But before that, I just want to highlight something that is incredibly important. If you want to avoid crisis management, you need kindness management. Instead of crisis management, which is at the end of the road, when all of these things overtake you, instead of you being able to deal with them with awareness and support, you need to practice kindness management. And the kindness management that I'm talking about is not only towards other people. We know about what it does to be kind and to help other people. But what often happens is we put ourselves, other people are very important, but so are you. And when I talk to groups of women in particular, the way that I find that they can relate to what I'm saying is please look after your husband's wife. Please look after your children's mother. Please look after your colleague's friend. Because to say look after yourself, for people who have been so reared to be nurturers and caregivers, which we don't want to mess with. Let me be absolutely clear. It's the most wonderful role. We don't want to mess with that at all. But we also have to say your needs are important. I'm here to understand you and I'm here to honor them. But I can't leave myself out of it. Because what happens if you do is you inadvertently, you don't want to, but you inadvertently may build up resentment to the very people that you're trying to be nice to. because you couldn't talk, or you couldn't take responsibility, or you couldn't be self-disclosing, or you couldn't be vulnerable in a very honoring way. What I would appreciate, what would help me out, what I value so much about you, what I like is this. What would help? Yes, I definitely can do it. Will you give me an hour or two? Not right now. What I need is, please just can you help me out and give me 15 or 20 minutes that I just need on my own? We sometimes feel that we're not entitled enough, or we don't count enough. We're there only. Now, if you don't serve yourself and practice this kindness management of self-compassion, what do I need to fill me up at this time so that I can be full for you as well? I need maybe a little bit. I've discovered something. It was really interesting. I've lived in the same house for a very long time. I didn't even know that there was winter sun. Do you know that? I knew that I had a patio because I used to go out there when I was entertaining to see that there were nice flowers or that the wine was fine. It was always for other people, hardly ever in the day, most especially in winter. I've discovered the warmth of that winter sun. And I take a little bit of time out when I can in the day just to appreciate things that were always there that I never ever saw before. The garden that I had, I never saw before. There's so many things that I'm seeing now differently, maybe because of being at home so much, and I have been at home so much, maybe because of a renewed kind of gratitude that a lot of people are experiencing, most especially for relationships, and an emphasis on the importance of family and of relationships that is newer. Maybe we always had it, but not to the same kind of extent before. I can tell you that, sometimes I run these forums and I sometimes say to people, so what have you lost and what have you gained during this time? And they talk about what they've lost. And I think to myself often, it's not so much what I've really lost. I think about what I miss. And that missing is always to do with relationships. To have someone around you who absolutely is there, has your back when you leave the meeting, saying, how did it go? Did they respond well? Are you excited about it? And people are recognizing the value, as I say, of that support. And also having, so on a physical level, that self-compassion is taking a lot of forms. People are knowing the importance of sleep. They're knowing the importance of exercise and good nutrition, maybe in a way that they didn't focus on enough before. That's on a physical side. On a psychological side, as I say, having clean space without stuff that is unresolved, that is building up inside you, where you have these thoughts in your head just before you go to sleep at night. Finding good ways of communicating that aren't aggressive, without that kind of buildup, or that aren't submissive, that say, I will say yes when I really mean no. I'll do it because I have to and I think I should, not because I want to. Having clean space of finding good ways to honor yourself and your feelings and having them resolved between you and you. So you clean within yourself and between you and your partner and you and the people around you. So that space is kind of kept clean and you don't have that huge buildup. I always think of one example that I'll tell you quickly. It was a couple and the husband, it really wasn't a big deal at all. In fact, it was nothing. They were meant to be going out somewhere. That's all it was. She had said to him, please don't be late. This is important to me. He came home. It was about 15 minutes late. And this woman absolutely exploded and said, how can you do this to me? You always do this to me. And besides, do you remember that time? And I've never told you, but I should have, where you were so rude to my mother. I think it was 5 years, 4 months. and maybe 3 hours ago, and you leave your things lying around, and you never, and you always, and you this, and you that. This whole floodgates came spilling out because it was triggered by something. And I'll never forget the look on his face. He looked at her and he said to her, "Do you like hospital food? Because I think that's where you're going. I mean, lady, you have lost it now. You're out of control." And he turned to me and he said, "You know, this woman, she has written, scripted, directed, and starred in her own movie. I've never seen that movie. I don't even know what she's talking about, because she collected stuff that she would dismiss. Not important. I'll just get on with it. Why rock the boat?" And this stuff could be easily triggered at a point on a knife's edge by something as innocuous, seemingly innocuous, but it wasn't innocuous to her. It was just another example of not honoring her. It wasn't about being late. It was about saying, my needs are not important to you. And so these things have a habit of just growing and manifesting in ways that are really magnified and unrealistic. So the last thing I wanted to talk about on this is the difference between positivity and optimism. I said to you, the positivity can sometimes mean the denial of the reality. We don't want that at all. Optimism is totally different. Optimism is the belief and the knowing that we have survived, certainly as a people, and that we can see something different at the end of a difficult tunnel. You know, we can see, it was Freud who said, you need someone to love, you need something to do, and something to look forward to. It's hope, and it's faith, and it's belief. And that's the part that no one can ever take away from you. And when you have that in a very, very strong way, it influences your feelings, and that influences your behavior or your actions. Because if you believe that there could be a positive outcome, you act towards creating it in partnership. You act towards creating it, and you often do a lot then to create that kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. Nobody knows enough to be a pessimist. You just don't. So if you stop and you give up, then you'll create what you believe. But if you say, I know that there's something that resembles the me that I used to know just a little while ago, that still lives inside me, that doesn't go out, and I can create that together with whatever support I need. I'm not exactly sure when. It's like Viktor Frankl. You all know the story of man's search for meaning and how he survived the concentration camps. And when I had the privilege of seeing him and listening to him many, many, many years ago, I was very young, and I wanted to be a speaker, but I was nervous. And I watched him, this great person, and he stood on the stage, you know, and there were thousands of people, and he just looked all around him and he didn't speak. And you know me, I think, oh my goodness, this man has forgotten his lines. No, he didn't forget his lines. He just looked at the people and he said, you know, the reason that I survived the concentration camps was you. I've never seen you before. I've certainly never met you before, but in my dreams, I said these words 1,000 times. And he went on to talk about how he held on to the belief, and he knew that he had to get out to tell the story and to find some meaning in the experience. So what is the meaning that is revealing itself to us? The sixth stage that David Kessler felt was important, that can't be forced. You can't say, listen, there's meaning because there are dolphins that are swimming in the canals of Venice. When people are really, hurting and nervous, they try and relate to that, but they often really can't. The meaning is the real stuff that starts revealing itself through the journey, and how you can avoid the post-traumatic stress by owning the story and have more of a chance in understanding and keeping some of the priorities. So you do a self-audit. Where have I been? Where am I going? How do I want to spend my energy from now on? What are my priorities? What have I learned from this? What do I really value? What's important to me? Can I understand and own some of those lessons and hopefully sustain them going forward? As I said, this feeling of gratitude and resilience, I think, is what people are taking forward. My goodness, if I survived this and I could be rather bounce, not back, but bounce forward creatively, I know that I've got strengths. Just throw it at me now. You know, I'm not saying thank you for this amazing learning opportunity, but I am seeing meaning in this adversity and strength within myself that I really didn't know before. And I did refer to people getting a balance between how much is and how much isn't under their own control. And they're becoming more humble, much more humble. The rabbi knows this, and many of you know this. There is more humility about who is in control, what is in control, and how we can create that kind of good balance and a partnership, a humble partnership in that, being able to go forward. The connection with other people because of the empathy and being in this together, more of a participant in the human race. We have had to learn patience, and we've discovered a lot of things along the way. Things don't have to happen immediately. Without that immediate gratification or the anger that happens when we don't have it, I think that we've learned how to slow down a lot. And I think that also we will never say in the same way, just face reality ever again. We just won't. We know that we can create a different reality. Just like Itzhak Perlman did on that time when you know the story, I think, when the string of his violin snapped when he was on stage in front of a huge, huge audience. And you know, the audience knew that you can't play the violin with 3 strings, you have to have 4. And when he looked at the conductor and nodded to start playing again, there was disbelief because it wasn't real. It's not possible. The people in the audience knew that, the conductor knew that, but the problem was that Itzhak Perlman refused to know that. He just nodded deliberately. And when this conductor started conducting this magnificent symphony again, he modulated that instrument. He made it reach heights and sounds that these audiences had never witnessed before. And they were joined together because of the collective emotional event. Without words, they didn't have to talk. They were connected because of the wonder of what they were witnessing. And at the end of this unbelievable piece, something that wasn't real, they applauded and applauded and applauded. And he eventually held up his bow like this and calmed them all down. And he said to them, you know, in life, it's up to the artist to play with everything you have. And sometimes you have to play with what you have left. And that metaphor just remained of, you know, don't leave this earth with your music still inside you. Play the music that is still inside you and just grab it for yourself and for other people. Thank you very much.
That was absolutely incredible. I must say, it was really, really moving and amazing. I could actually listen to you for hours. I would like to extend my thanks to you, Dorianne, for a superb, most informative and enlightening presentation, which I'm sure many people benefited from. I echo Nelson Mandela's quote to you in your ability to instill hope and inspiration during such challenging times. Women are consistently faced with balancing work and life priorities. It was both a privilege and a pleasure to listen to you. We truly appreciate people like yourself who are willing to give of their time and talents to enrich the lives of others. Thank you once again for your enlightening presentation. Thank you to all the listeners. Have a good night.
Thank you very much, Chaya, for the opportunity and the rabbi.
You were amazing.
And for setting the bar for us. Really.
You were truly amazing. Honestly, I could sit and listen to you for hours.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Have a good night.
You too, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Where's the music?
You know, and the question, no one was right.